It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. And for the purpose, as I'll just remind everybody, this survey is really long. So instead of spending an hour and a half presenting every single question, we've kind of consolidated it down into at the 30,000 foot level. And then if you have any specific questions, having looked at the data, I'm more than happy to answer anything that I haven't covered in the PowerPoint. To review with everybody what we undertook for the city, we spoke with 400 randomly selected residents across the community. The interviews were done late spring, early summer, May 22nd through June 14th. Average interview time was 24 minutes. Non-response rate was 5%. The 400 sample, always projectable to plus or minus 5% in 95 out of 100 cases. Once again, margin of error is based on the size of the sample, not the percent of the population. So a 400 sample in Minnetonka, a 400 sample in Hennepin County, or a 400 sample in the state of Minnesota is plus or minus 5%. Putting up some demographics so you can see the profile of the sample. Demographics are done for two reasons. First, to validate the sample against updated census information, but then also we can look at differences. You know, how do households with children feel versus households with seniors, homeowners versus renters. Cell phone only households, 51%. There continues, every community in the metro area, my 23-year-old is amazed that the still landline only households exist. It's 11% of the population. I tell them that's grandma and grandpa. And then both landline and cell phones are 38%. If we continue with the demographics, we ask folks how long have they lived in the city. We have 33% that have been in the city for 5 years or less, while we have 21% that have been in the community for 20 years. Median on this one comes in at about 9 years. The typical resident has lived in the community. 25%, the household contains a senior. 30%, it contains a child under the age of 17. 1 in 4 are renters. Home values obviously have gone up, and they continue to go up, and people always over-assess how much their home is worth. Median on this one will come in roughly at about $410,000 is the typical home in the community. 25% are 18 to 34-year-olds, while 35% are over the age of 55. Median comes in on this one at about 47 years old is a typical resident. Just under 3/4 indicated they were white, 14% African American, 4% Hispanic Latinx, 5% Asian Pacific Islander, 2% multiracial. 50-50 men versus women, 1% non-binary. On this one, I'll point out, it adds to 101. There's rounding involved. And some of the charts will be between 99 and 101. Sometimes with rounding, it can go to 102, but then I do a rounding correction. So that's why we have at that one 101. I believe that the men were at 49.5%. Non-binary was at 0.5%, so I just rounded both of them up. And then the geographic distribution, Ward 1, 27%, Ward 2, 25%, and then Ward 3 and 4, 24%. Any questions on methodology or demographics? All right. What do folks like most about the community? Now, these first two questions are open-ended. They can tell us whatever, and we collapse them down into categories. And so this one, we're looking at the values. What do people react to? You have 5 that hit double digits. The lake, friendly people at 13%, trees and nature, open space, and safe at 11%. If you kind of combine the natural environment, the lakes, trees and nature, and open spaces, though, it's almost 40% of the sample, indicating that is of value to them. Then you have, going down the list, you have schools, quiet, housing neighborhood, parks, trails, close to jobs. This has always been and will probably always be not your typical suburban community. They're not saying location. They're not saying it's close to the job. It really is more of a small town aspect of what they value as opposed to the big city life that they're in the midst of in the community. Now, if we ask what they like most, we always follow up with what's the most serious issue. On this one, after talking with staff, we're all kind of scratching our head because you have a very statistically significant change at the top. Lack of sidewalks tripled in 1 year. It was 6%, it went to 19%. Asked if there was some specific instances. Sometimes this can be driven by something that happens in the community or in a metro area where there's a spillover effect into people's attitudes and opinions. But that is something to flag. Is it a temporary blip? Obviously, we need two points of data in order to establish that. Everything else is basically where it was before. Traffic congestion at 12%. One area that you're atypical is on the perception of taxes. What happened in the metro area and pretty much across the state on November 15th, it was like somebody flipped the switch on property tax hostility. A lot of people got their statements in the spring of 2022 and were thrilled that their property value went up 25%. 90% of them had no thought on how that was going to impact their property taxes until they opened on November 15th. So what we saw is property tax hostility go on this question. The norm right now in 2023 is 20 to 25%. Some communities it's gone up 4 times what it was in the past. So it has not happened here. That 11% is the lowest I have in 2023 in any community, school district, or city that I've surveyed in. What else comes in? No entertainment, street maintenance, too much development, lack of public transit, lack of diversity. Also, we'll go down to the bottom, the nothings. We've talked about these are the boosters. You've always had a large booster core in Minnetonka. They just see no problems here. I mean, there were points probably 15, 20 years ago, I believe you had nothings at 38%. Okay, what has happened to the nothings in the pandemic, people just are less happy. They're less enthusiastic about everything coming out of the pandemic. The booster, that nothing raking before the pandemic was 10%. We're now down to 5%. So you have about 4 times the amount of boosters, those that absolutely see no problems in the community. And as you follow their responses through the survey, they're positive about everything. Whether it's governance, administration, park and rec, they follow through. They are, so you have a very large base of 1 in 5 folks in the community. Now, the quality of life. This illustrates the shift I'm talking about post-pandemic, and that is the less enthusiastic ranking. Minnesotans are difficult to get to be enthusiastic about anything. It's just kind of in the nature of Minnesotans. If things can be excellent or good, they're going to be good. And if you ask them how it can become excellent, 25% of Minnesotans will say, doesn't need to be. Good is good enough. It's just it's what we do. We've seen the shift, though, in the excellent rating in the pandemic because people have just found more things to latch onto that they're unhappy about. But the importance, it continues to be, though, they don't go unfavorable. They go from the hard positive to the soft positive. So you still have 100% of people rating it excellent or good. 1%, that's rounding on the only fair. It's just the shift from excellent to good that's happened. The quality of life rating, the excellent ranking now is 10% as a baseline. Across the metro area. So you can still see you're extraordinarily high. It's just this shift that we've seen everywhere. And this not only applies to the quality of life in cities, it applies to the quality of education in school districts. The shift has happened across the board when we're talking about general rankings. How welcoming is Minnetonka? 98% rated either very or somewhat welcoming. Only 2% say not to or not at all. There is a shift. It's statistically significant, but it's from the intense to the soft intense. So we're going from 63 to 55% saying very welcoming. You still, though, have a flat majority saying the community is very welcoming and 98% saying at least somewhat welcoming. How would they rate Minnetonka as a welcoming community for all? Now this one we have an increase. Excuse me. The excellent rating went up 17 points, with 98% now rating the city favorably. What about treating all residents with respect? It was 92. It's 93 with a 12-point increase. What about treating all residents fairly? It was 91. It's now 90 with a 7-point increase rating of excellent. And then on providing services to residents of all backgrounds, increase of 16 points on the excellent. The overall goes from 90 to 94%. So when you dive into some specifics on it, instead of the overarching, there is more intensity on positive, the excellent rating on the individual 4 components that we looked at. What about the priority for the city of Minnetonka to create a diverse, inclusive, and fair community? Pretty much over the past, we had 62% the first time we asked this question in 21. Then we went to 68%, and now we're up to 70%. So it's stepped up each year. As far as intensity of that high priority, it's basically been in the 1 in 5, 1 in 4 range with 20%. Last year we had 29% say low or not a priority at all. This time 30%. So very little change on this question except a steady increase combining the high and moderate, going up to now 7 out of 10 residents in the community. Overall rating of city services is just a sea of blue instead of the red riptide that I see in some communities. You have very little unfavorable rating. The highest unfavorable you have is pavement repair and patching. It's always been an issue going back many mayors and many city managers before working with the city, but still that 12% is extraordinarily high. Or extraordinarily low for an unfavorable rating. The norm unfavorable right now is 35%. In cities that do surveys in March and April, it goes to 45 or 50% unfavorable. So that is just an extraordinarily high ranking. Everything else is in single digits. Very, very well regarded city services as we have seen in the past. What about the value of city services? This is also counter to what we're seeing because on this one, this question asks folks about to consider the property taxes they pay and the services they receive. Now, I've mentioned that we didn't see that bump up in the property tax hostility and what the most serious issue is, but the dynamic of people's perceptions on property taxes is they're paying more. So does that impact the value? It actually doesn't. It actually goes up from 83% to 90%, which is a statistically significant increase. So at the time where a lot of folks are saying my property taxes are too high and it's impacting the value that they see in the services, that's not the case at all here. Your high ratings of city services overcomes any sort of property tax hostility that folks may be experiencing. Would they support a tax increase to maintain city services? Yes, this is pretty consistent now. Ever since the recession of 2008, 2009, folks understand inflation, they understand cost of living, and now in the last 3 years they understand it more than ever, that it costs more in order to maintain what you have. And so pretty much this is normally somewhere between 70 and 80% in communities saying, yes, I'll support a property tax increase for maintenance. You're at 82%, and that's actually a 10-point increase from 2022. If they were going to prioritize a 1% property tax levy increase, where would they put it in the budget? I'm sorry to say this is what we'd call a pollster's nightmare because there is no consensus. You have 29%, that's say parks and trails, 27% to streets, 27% to police and fire, 7% named another service, 2% say no, I don't want the 1% property tax levy increase, and 9% are unsure. So on this one, you have equal parts splitting up over 75% of the pie for the 3 major areas of streets, police, fire, and park and rec. Would they support continued CIP investments? In this question, let me read this question. It's the city's CIP or Capital Improvements Program plans and finances major refurbishments, replacements, and addition of recreational facilities, parks, and trails. Do you support the continued investment of both property taxes and other funding sources to preserve or expand these various community assets? Do you support only preserving these assets or also expanding them? So 64% are for preservation, 19% say both, only 4% say no, they're not in favor of the CIP improvements. So this is pretty typical for what we're seeing. You get the support, that 82% support the property tax increase to maintain, 2/3 on the CIP investments. It's about the preservation. That's kind of the overarching theme also in 2023. We don't delve into it in your survey as much, is folks' financial insecurity. And we're very much in a place right now when asking folks about their income and their expenses that they are about half in the metro area now are saying they're financially stressed. When that gets to that level, you have much more folks that the desire is to maintain what you have instead of any sort of enhancement. We're going to keep the have-to-haves and the nice-to-haves maybe set aside to a different time. How important is it for the city to take action on 6 different components of the environment? So this is, they could say very somewhat, not to, or not at all. I've combined the very and somewhat into the green, the not to or not at all into the red. And there has been some change just over the 1 year, and that's reflected in on the far right-hand side. So on climate change, 61% it's at least somewhat important. That's a 15% increase from 2022. Reducing waste, that's a 5% increase to 60%. Water conservation actually went down 12 points. Energy conservation went down 17, expanding transit options went up 15, and improved stormwater management went up 8. It's very unique. This one, though, if we look, we've asked this, I think, 3 or 4 years now. This has kind of been a yo-yo every single year, and I think a lot of it kind of depends on the issue, the topic that's being discussed. Climate change, obviously, it's a big topic this year. When we're looking at weather events, smoke, all of those sorts of things that have been happening. The same time, transit is at a much higher spotlight. So I think this one is always going to be a bouncing ball from year to year. Typically, you don't see these sorts of changes in an annual survey on attitudes and opinion. Do folks feel that they can have input into zoning and development decisions? Absolutely. 86% indicate yes. That's the high now in the pandemic. You look back at that 2020 survey, we were about 3-4 months into the pandemic, and that's the low. But the shift, you could see they were unsure at that point in time. Nobody knew how we were going to have input in 2020, whether it's going to be virtual or what have you. So at this point in time, though, that 86% is just right at the top. The norm on this right now for any sort of opportunity specifically or generally input into city decisions is about 70% of folks. The job of the city staff, they're getting close to, it's going to be really hard to improve on this when you're at 96% favorable. You have 3% only fair, only 1% said they were unsure. So on this one, we always look at a ratio. It's 96-3, so it's a 32-1 ratio. The norm on city staff over the last 3 years is about 11-1 ratio. So just off the chart. And if we look in the upper right-hand corner, you do have 36% that indicated that they have had quite a lot or some firsthand contact with city staff. So about a 1 in 3 indicating that they have actual firsthand experience with them. 42% indicate that they had contact City Hall during the past year, just off the charts with the individual ratings. 100% on courtesy, 98% on professionalism, 95% on efficiency, and 94% on the one that's most difficult for cities is the ease of reaching help, somebody that can help. Norm on that right now is 80%. That 94% is just outstanding. And then how are folks getting their information? The newsletter is still, that is the shining example across the metro area, the Minnetonka Memo. Still a flat out majority call it by name. This is open-ended. They can tell us whatever. And so 56% Minnetonka Memo, 21% the city website, 11% local newspaper, 5% word of mouth, 6% social media. It's really interesting. One other area that you're very counter on, and that is word of mouth. Word of mouth is exploding all across the metro area. As the metro area, I say, becomes small town Minnesota, and a lot of that has to do with the local newspapers. If they're not going out of business, they're not covering the cities like they used to. And so very specifically, older men would typically go to the newspaper, they're now going to word of mouth. That's not the case here, but it's driven because you have such an incredible newsletter. It's not the newsletter was the key source all along. So that decline in the newspaper readership and coverage hasn't impacted folks to going to an informal source of information. That is the kind of the overarching big picture. Obviously, there were a lot of other questions on there, so I'd be happy to answer any questions about these or anything I didn't cover that you'd like to discuss.